Thank you. So I think we're all muted. So as we gather, let's first acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we find ourselves today. Let's acknowledge our gratitude that we share this land. We acknowledge our sorrow for the cost of that sharing and our hope that we can move to a place of justice and partnership together. I'm delighted to welcome everyone here today, and I'm particularly pleased to introduce Jennifer Byrne. Jennifer's an academic, an expert in the law, and an advocate for victims of trafficking. Jennifer is the Director of Anti-Slavery Australia, a centre based at the Faculty of Law, University of Technology, Sydney. Her first association with ACRATH was in 2005, and she's been a firm friend ever since. Jennifer is passionate about supporting survivors of human trafficking, and she's a formidable advocate for law reform in this area. Today, Jennifer speaks with Cindy Bohan about Anti-Slavery Australia's crucial proposal for a national compensation scheme. Thank you to Jennifer and Cindy.
Thanks, Marguerite.
Thank you. Jen, it is with real honour that we're sitting here chatting. And as Marg said, you've known ACRATH for quite some time. So can you take us back to 2006 when you wrote and you presented the Shadow Report to CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women? There are some people here on the screen who assisted with that. So can you take us back to that moment or that time?
Yeah, I can do that with pleasure, Cindy. So as Marguerite said, I've had a very close connection with ACRATH since 2005. And in the way that Zoom organises itself, I can see Louise Cleary there, up there in front of my screen. And it was Louise's strategic vision that really led to CEDAW and the idea that a group of Catholic religious organisations would come together and support a shadow report on trafficking that we would take and present in person to CEDAW in January 2006. So that whole process started in 2005. And really, it was pretty amazing. I was, going back down memory lane this morning, and it really was an inspiring activity that we did, but led by ACRATH. And it's good to remember, I think, that this time, 2005, was exactly when Australia really started to respond to what we now call modern slavery. So around about the same time, the UN was making the trafficking protocol. The Australian government developed an action plan in about 2004 and moved to ratify the protocol in September 2005. I know you're looking at me, Cindy, and you warned me not to be too technical, so.
No, I'm fine, because I'm sorry if I scared you with my, oh, that's great, it's good.
No, I think it really is important because it does recognise just the degree of innovation that ACRATH was leading at that time, and really to send two of us all the way to New York to present the Shadow Report, which we wrote, was pretty amazing. So, it was in January in New York, very cold. I went over with Georgina Costello, who was then a young barrister and is now senior counsel at the Victoria Bar. But we went together to present this Shadow Report. ACRATH put me up in a place called Leo House, which is in New York, and it was pretty, it was a lot of fun staying there. It's where there used to be a TV show called Special Victims, SV or something. Does anybody know what I'm talking about?
No.
Anyway, you would know it. It was a sort of classic New York police procedural, often around sexual assault and other sorts of terrible crimes, but they used to film at Leo House. So we were always, very excited to think there could be film stars. Joining us at ACRATH never happened, but it was all part of the experience. Leo House was a Catholic guest house, and we were based there throughout the CEDAW experience, which was really amazing.
That whole experience, and even looking at you, you seem, like it's pretty horrible work in one sense, but you're talking from a really heartfelt moment that it actually, it's not only the head. And I think when I look at anti-slavery, the website, and when I hear you talk, it's very definitely human-centred, the work, with a real human rights framework, which I suppose law is. I've not really been connected to law, but yeah. There's the TV show, Law and Order.
Yeah, that was it. SVU, Special Victims Unit. It's all coming back now. But look, that is one of the things that we said in our shadow report, that we together came from a human rights framework, and we promoted that, and we encouraged the Australian government to develop policies and procedures that reflected human rights standards. So that is part of our shared mission, I think, that we do put the victims and the survivors at the heart of everything that we do, that we try and recognise their humanity, their experience, and listen to them, learn from them.
Thank you. In the report, the recommendation number 6 stated, and I couldn't remember it, so I'll just read it, that all Australian states and territories introduce laws which reflect the Criminal Code Amendment. Such laws should be expanded to include statutory rights to victims' compensation. Did we get anywhere with that?
No, not really. But the time is right. So now is the time. So let's come together on this important advocacy point. So back in 2005, when we were writing this, we thought that each of the states and territories should address trafficking within the schemes that they had on foot at the time. So the states and territories still have those schemes. We've got 8 different schemes in Australia, but we've moved on since then. And we now say that we need to have a national scheme, a scheme that's uniform, accessible, fair, and responsive. And we don't have that. We've got 8 different schemes. People can apply to any one of them, depending on where they experienced slavery or trafficking, and they will be treated differently in each one of those places. So it's actually absurd. It's illogical, and it needs to be fixed, that we have 8 different schemes with different time limits, different thresholds, different ways to assess harm, and different amounts that could be payable. Like in some states, it could be 10,000, in others it might be 100,000. So, we are saying that crimes like trafficking, human rights abuses like trafficking, slavery, servitude are federal crimes. They're in our criminal code, offences that apply throughout the whole of Australia. It's just irrational to have 8 different compensation schemes that are all different. We want survivors to be treated equally and fairly. And there's another absurdity here, of course, and that is if a survivor has been harmed in more than one state, and some of our clients have been, they might have started out in Queensland, then exploited in New South Wales and then Victoria, that's potentially 3 different applications for victims' compensation. So much more rational and logical to establish a national scheme. The logic is impeccable. We just need the political will.
And I suppose that's it. Like, what's going to get it over the line? Like the political will, and ACRATH, that we are ready to take a challenge. So what's going to help you get this over the line with, soon, as soon as possible, I suppose?
I really love it. Let's do this as soon as possible. I completely agree. I think we should make this the year. I mean, I've made decisions in my life thinking that this is the year I want to focus on this. I've put other things on hold. I think 2022 has to be the year. But we need political will. I know that ACRATH's going to Parliament. I'm not sure when you're doing that, but you know, back in the old days, I even went with ACRATH sometimes to Parliament and joined that lobbying exercise. ACRATH's got a fine track record of being effective advocates in the political sphere. So what we need is exactly that kind of advocacy, to take this to politicians, to get their support and buy-in. And, you know, when you look at it objectively, you know, I've already said that it's irrational to have the scheme that we have, but, you know, a national compensation scheme's been endorsed in Parliament too. So there's a very important report called Hidden in Plain Sight. And that report, which was about Australia's Modern Slavery Act, recommended that Australia establish a national compensation scheme. So we just need the political buy-in and the will and effective advocacy. So, you know, ACRATH's got a vital role to play here. You know, I think that as much engagement as we can have politically is good, you know, to really boost that kind of engagement and make this a priority issue. We have focused on issues previously, like better visa support or better material support for survivors. We've been able to achieve great reforms. And we've even been able to encourage government to establish new laws. And thinking about forced marriage, you know, we have, you know, quite a responsive forced marriage support program. So we do have a track record, but it's about being able to persuade government and politicians that this is a real issue and that creating a national compensation scheme, you know, will help the most vulnerable.
I guess that's my question, Jen. How? Like, how will it help someone who has been so egregiously treated and so, I don't know, like, what's the hope that a compensation scheme can assist someone?
Well, I can see along the strip on the top that Christine Carolyn's here, and she often speaks to this and, you know, refers to a particular case that she knows about that took place in one of the Victorian courts. But we know that, firstly, we've got an international obligation to do this, to develop an effective remedy. We do not have an effective remedy at all at the moment for the reasons that I've outlined very briefly. One of the important benefits of having a compensation scheme, and here a national scheme, is that victims of these human rights abuses, and we're talking about the most egregious forms of abuse, you know, human trafficking, slavery, servitude, forced labour, you know, potentially organ trafficking, you know, have suffered terribly, have experienced criminal exploitation. And if there is a government-funded scheme that recognises the harm that people have suffered, that means a lot. So it is no longer something that is a matter of personal shame or stigma, but there is an official process that recognises the harm that's been suffered. So that itself is restorative. But, you know, more importantly, or in addition rather, you know, financial recognition gives people options. It allows them to make decisions about their lives. And, you know, we have accessed quite a lot of victims' compensation through New South Wales in the old days. And we know that our clients have used that money to do things like fund education, provide for accommodation for family back home in the country of our origin. One of our clients even has been able to buy a house. You know, she is obviously not living in Sydney or Melbourne, but able to use compensation towards, you know, a substantial deposit on accommodation. People can make decisions about their lives, and this gives them a boost. And one of the things that we've always said is that the payment should not be relevant for social security. So the fact that a person has a payment through compensation does not mean that their social security payment, if they're receiving that, should stop. You know, it was the case for a while, which is very unfortunate that, you know, there were clients on what was called special benefit. And when they got the compensation amount, they were required to use the amount that they received in recognition of the harm they'd experienced to meet their daily cost of living, and their special benefits ceased during that time. So, you know, we have thought about a model that does address all these factors, and that is one of the things that should be addressed there.
Yeah. We were lucky. We saw some of the model that you have outlined. It does seem very sensible. So what has stopped it? Like 16 years ago, you mentioned it, like, you know, in this report that everyone here, you know, so what's prevented it so far?
I'm glad you said 16. You know, for me, it feels like 160 years. A long time ago. You know, it is the political, and then of course we hadn't nutted out the scheme ourselves. We just said, you know, we'd approached it theoretically. We'd said, you know, there's an international obligation. There are 8 different schemes. This is not effective. We need a national scheme. Full stop. But then anti-slavery started Australia with a law firm, started to develop what a model could look like. I'm glad you think it's sensible. It is based on existing models, and it did take a really long time to develop that model. But there's nothing controversial about it. It is, we've learned a lot from other models, and we continued to learn as schemes developed. So most recently, we've taken into account the Royal Commission into institutional responses, and, you know, included part of that in this particular model that we've developed.
Ah, I was going to ask, are there models that you're replicating around the world?
Well, in Australia.
Okay.
We base ourselves in an Australian response. So we looked at models that existed and still do exist at the Commonwealth level. One of those was around defence. That's now stopped. But the Australian Victims of Overseas Terrorism scheme is still on foot. So, you know, we looked at that really carefully. And of course, we've looked now at the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses redress scheme. We also, you know, researched endlessly each of the schemes in each of the different states and territories, and, you know, drew on the best of the best in the articulation of this model.
It's pretty profound. And when I say it's sensible, and when I was reading through it, it was sort of, it doesn't seem dramatic. It just seems these people, and I love what you say, you know, they are people behind this scheme, aren't they? Just definitely.
Well, there are people behind the scheme, and I was reflecting on that this morning, Cindy, and I know, you know, we want to look behind the numbers, but, you know, I did just look at a media release from the Australian Federal Police last year on the World Day Against Trafficking, and, you know, they said that they'd received 224 reports just in the 2020-2021 year, and they were reports of modern slavery, you know, including forced marriage, forced labour, sexual servitude, domestic servitude, trafficking children. Every single one of these is a terrible abuse of human rights and a crime in Australian law. So the numbers are important, but, you know, thinking about who is exploited, we know that the Institute of Criminology says that only 1 in 5 people are ever identified. So, you know, if we've got 5, we've got 1 that we know about and 4 who are suffering. And this is, you know, egregious suffering, you know, breaches of human rights and breaches of law, you know, terrible exploitation. And, you know, you'd know that. I know that ACRATH's tuned into this, and you'd know about some of the recent convictions that have taken place in Melbourne and New South Wales particularly, and South Australia. And you'd know the facts behind those convictions. You know, each one of them records terrible hardship, abuse, control of a person, taking away of human rights and so on. People are held in slavery, they're not allowed to eat appropriately, they're told when to sleep, you know, when to eat, what to do. They have their identity documents taken, they don't have autonomy over their lives, they're threatened, they're abused, they're treated like an object. So that's the context that we're working in.
Jen, thank you. That image or those images about the people and what they're experiencing. So is compensation enough?
Well, it's a start. It's not perfect because, you know, how do we restore a person's humanity if the humanity has been taken away? But we can do something that will help that process. And recognition of crime is important. There are different forms of recognition, of course, but financial compensation is important. And that's the feedback we've had consistently from our clients. You know, at the time we wrote the CEDAW report, there had not been any cases of compensation that had been awarded to people who'd suffered through what we now call modern slavery in Australia. But, you know, around about that time, in 1995, actually, there was a young girl trafficked to Australia from Thailand. She was only 14 and she was exploited terribly here. And Fiona McLeod, QC or SC, took the very first case to in this case, to New South Wales Tribunal. And that was the first case of victims' compensation paid to somebody who'd suffered through modern slavery. And that was in 2007. So, you know, we went to CEDAW in 2006. The following year, there was the very first case of compensation made to a victim. You know, since then, there have been many others. We've done many cases ourselves through the Anti-Slavery Australian Legal Service, particularly in New South Wales and Victoria. But we know that the schemes can be complex and inaccessible. They don't compensate for all the forms of modern slavery that are now included in the Commonwealth Criminal Code, particularly where there is some kind of subtle or subtle form of coercion.
Jen, you've talked about what ACRATH can do, and it's nearly time to pack up. It sounds like a really transformative moment. Like there's been defining moments in this work, and if it can get over the line, it sounds, you know, sensible but also amazing. Each of us, as well as ACRATH will do one thing, and that means everyone here will support the ACRATH move. Is there something individuals can do? Because we've got really active individuals who want to, you know, take things on. So is there a call out for each of us on the screens?
Yep, there is. And Cindy and I spoke about this earlier in the week, and, you know, we thought it would be really good if we expanded the information that we have on the Anti-Slavery Australia website. Oh, and our project is called Justice for All. And if you search Justice for All Anti-Slavery Australia, you'd find it there. But we will boost that material. You know, we are much slower than you are in ACRATH, and your website, you know, changes, you know, within seconds, but it takes us a bit longer. So maybe by tomorrow we'll have some more material on the Anti-Slavery Australia website, and we will include dot points that can be used in advocacy, possibly a draft letter and so on. So that will be there, and we really want to encourage people to reach out to the members of Parliament and also their networks. And one of the things we've been thinking about, and I'd like to know what you think about this, is that, you know, we could put up some communications material that could be used by people who want to work within their networks. So, you know, that could be possibly a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Something like that could be used with, you know, pre-filled images and text that could be adapted. But, you know, building the grassroots engagement is going to be absolutely critical.
Well, I think everyone here will be up to it. So, Jen, thank you. I'll call Marguerite in. Jen, I really appreciate from a personal perspective. I've learned so much this week, chatting to you, reading all the stuff to make sure I knew what to ask, things like that. So thanks a lot. And it's over to Marg. Thanks, Marg.
Just before Marg speaks, can I just say something?
Please do.
Which is, I want just to thank you all individually for the work that you do. And, you know, I'm looking at everybody along the strip, along the top, and, you know, I'm seeing many friends here and many people that I've known for a very long time. So, Cindy, part of what you said was that this can be very difficult work. It can be traumatic and heartbreaking, but having partners and friends in the space makes a huge difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen and Cindy. Jennifer, your energy and hope are such a gift to the survivors, but also to us who are, you know, those of us who advocate in this area. You know, when you talk about the victims and survivors are at the very heart of what you do, that inspires us, I think. You know, you said listen to them, learn from them. That truly inspires me. I think ACRATH, certainly, I know ACRATH is going to be advocating along this area in the next coming months. It is crucial, as you've said, and it's a wonderful thing, I think, that we can collaborate with Anti-Slavery Australia and yourselves. I hope the political will is there, and I think we're inspired to make sure that we influence that political will as much as we can. You did mention your website, so Anti-Slavery Australia's website. There is a wealth of information, and I think you called it Justice for All. So perhaps we might all make that an action that we do, that we go and have a look at that. Please, everyone, thank you for today, for being here. Thank you to Cindy for facilitating this really inspiring conversation. I wish we'd had an hour, but anyway, we don't. Please share what you've learnt today with family, with friends, with members of your congregations, colleagues, and urge anyone who might have missed today's conversation to watch it when it goes up onto our website in probably a couple of days. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you especially to Jennifer and to Cindy.